The night the ninth plantation burned, the air itself screamed. It wasn't the wind howling through the cypress trees or the distant hoot of an owl. It was the sound of wood cracking under unbearable heat, of glass exploding from window frames, of human voices. Once proud, commanding, cruel, now reduced to raw, animal shrieks of terror and agony. Flames clawed at the sky like vengeful spirits, painting the blackness a sickly, pulsing orange. Smoke, thick and greasy, coiled upwards, carrying the stench of burning timber, scorched earth, and something far worse. The unmistakable, sweetly nauseating reek of roasting flesh. From the edge of the sugarcane field, hidden in the deep velvet shadow of a massive live oak, Lazarus watched. His face, usually a mask of quiet endurance, was illuminated only by the hellish glow reflecting in his dark, unblinking eyes. Not a muscle twitched, not a breath escaped his lips. He simply watched as the world he knew, the world that had tried to break him, to own him, to erase him, was consumed by the fire he had lit. This wasn't just destruction. This was justice. This was the final, terrible payment for a debt written in blood, sweat, and tears. And Lazarus, the quiet slave from the cold north, the one they'd called docile and broken, had finally collected. Years before the fires, before the name Lazarus became a whispered curse in the drawing rooms of Southern planters and a secret prayer on the lips of the enslaved, he had been a boy named Eli. He hadn't been born under the broiling sun of Louisiana, but far away, in the rocky, unforgiving soil of upstate New York. His father, Samuel, was a free black man who worked the docks in Albany, his hands calloused from hauling crates, his back bent from years of honest labor. His mother, Miriam, kept a small garden and took in washing, her voice soft as she sang hymns while she worked. Their home was modest, a single room above a cooper's shop, but it was theirs. Eli knew the taste of freedom before he knew the weight of a chain. He knew the rough texture of his father's work shirt, the smell of his mother's rosemary bread baking in the oven, the sound of his own laughter echoing in the narrow streets as he played stickball with other children, both black and white. It was a life built on dignity, however fragile. The fracture came on a Tuesday. Eli was 10. He'd been sent to the market for flour. The walk back was long, the sack heavy on his thin shoulder. He cut through a quieter alley, a shortcut he'd used 100 times. He never saw the men coming. One moment, the alley was empty, sun-dappled and quiet. The next, rough hands clamped over his mouth, dragging him backwards into a waiting wagon. He kicked, he bit, he tried to scream, but a filthy rag was stuffed into his mouth, and a blow to the head sent stars exploding behind his eyes. The last thing he saw before darkness swallowed him was the familiar shape of his flour sack lying abandoned in the dust. He awoke to the stench of unwashed bodies, vomit, and despair. He was in the hold of a ship, crammed in with dozens of other terrified children and young men. Shackles bit into his ankles. The air was thick, hot, and suffocating. Whispers in languages he didn't understand mixed with sobs and the groans of the sick. A man with a face like cracked leather and eyes devoid of pity stood over them. A heavy whip coiled at his belt. "Welcome to your new life, boy," the man rasped, his voice like gravel. "Your property now. Forget your name. Forget your past. You belong to Master Thaddeus Vance of Cypress Grove Plantation, Louisiana. And you'll learn your place, or you'll die learning it." The voyage south was a descent into a nightmare. Eli, now just boy to his captors, learned the brutal arithmetic of slavery. 1 lash for crying, 2 lashes for asking for water, 3 lashes for looking a white man in the eye. He saw boys weaker than him waste away from fever, their small bodies tossed overboard like refuse. He learned to swallow his fear, to make his eyes dull, to move with a slow, deliberate obedience that masked the frantic terror churning inside him. He clung to the memory of his parents' faces, the sound of his real name, like a lifeline in a stormy sea. He would survive. He had to. He would find his way back. Cypress Grove was a sprawling empire of green hill. Endless rows of sugar canes stretched towards the horizon, shimmering under the relentless sun. The air hummed with insects and the constant, rhythmic thwack of machetes cutting cane. The big house, a grand white-columned mansion, stood on a rise, overlooking the fields like a watchful predator. Master Thaddeus Vance was a man carved from arrogance and cruelty. He was tall, with a hawk-like nose and cold, pale eyes that seemed to see everything and care for nothing. He believed in order, in discipline, and in the absolute God-given right of white men to own black flesh. He ran his plantation with a ledger in one hand and a whip in the other. Eli's first task was in the stables. He was small for his age, deemed too weak for the cane fields. He mucked out stalls, brushed the horses, polished the master's riding boots until they shone like obsidian. He learned the rhythms of the house. He saw how Vance treated his wife, Ilara, with a cold formality that bordered on contempt. He saw the way Vance's overseer, a brute named Silas Crow, delighted in inflicting pain, his face flushed with pleasure as the lash tore into bare backs. He saw the quiet despair in the eyes of the other slaves, the way their spirits seemed to wither under the sun and the whip. One scorching afternoon, Eli was polishing Vance's boots on the back porch. He kept his head down, his movements precise. Vance was pacing, arguing with Crow about the yield from Field 3. "Lazy, shiftless niggers," Vance spat, kicking over a bucket of water Eli had just drawn. "They need more incentive. Crow, take 10 lashes off every back in that field at sundown. Make it count." Crow grinned, a yellow-toothed leer. "Yes, sir, Master Vance. They'll learn." Eli's hands trembled slightly on the boot. He thought of the men in Field 3, Old Man Henry, who could barely stand. Young Ben, barely 15. 10 lashes could kill them in this heat. He kept polishing, his knuckles white. Later that day, as Eli carried a tray of lemonade to the mistress in the parlor, he overheard her speaking softly to her maid, a woman named Hattie. "And that boy in the stables," Ilara Vance murmured, her voice laced with a strange mix of pity and detachment. "The quiet one from the north. He has such haunted eyes, like he remembers something better. It's unsettling." Hattie, her face carefully neutral, replied, "Best he forgets it, mistress. Remembering only brings pain." Eli froze in the hallway, the tray heavy in his hands. "Remembering only brings pain." The words echoed in his skull, but forgetting felt like dying. He couldn't forget his mother's face. He couldn't forget the taste of freedom. The pain of remembering was the only thing that kept him from becoming truly broken. The first true test of his spirit came a month later. A new overseer arrived, a man named Briggs, even crueler than Crow. Briggs took an immediate dislike to Eli's quiet demeanor, mistaking it for insolence. One day, Briggs accused Eli of stealing an apple from the kitchen garden. Eli hadn't taken it, but denial was useless. Briggs dragged him to the whipping post in the center of the slave quarters. The other slaves were forced to watch. "Lesson for the rest of you lazy bastards," Briggs bellowed, uncoiling his rawhide whip. "See what happens when you steal from your betters." The first lash tore through Eli's thin shirt, opening a red line across his back. He bit down on his lip, tasting blood, refusing to cry out. The second lash came down harder, crossing the first. The third, a fourth. Each strike was a white-hot brand of agony. He could feel the skin splitting, the muscle screaming. He focused on a single thought. "My name is Eli. My name is Eli." He wouldn't give Briggs the satisfaction of hearing him scream. He wouldn't let them take his name. He lost count after the 7th lash. The world swam in and out of focus. He heard the gasps of the other slaves, the cruel laughter of Briggs. He felt the rough wood of the post against his forehead. And then, through the haze of pain, he saw Master Vance watching from the porch, sipping a mint julep, his expression one of mild boredom. This wasn't punishment for theft. This was entertainment. This was the casual, everyday cruelty that was the foundation of their world. When it was over, Eli collapsed. Strong hands, Old Man Henry's, carried him to the infirmary, a damp, dark shack smelling of herbs and infection. For days, he drifted in and out of fever. Hattie tended to him, cleaning his wounds with cool cloths, whispering words of comfort in a voice so low only he could hear. "Hold on, child," she murmured. "Hold on to that spark inside you. Don't let them snuff it out." It was during this recovery that Eli made a decision. He would survive, yes, but survival wasn't enough. He would not just endure. He would remember. And one day, when the time was right, he would make them pay. The quiet boy from the north began to harden, not into stone, but into steel. He learned to observe everything. He learned the layout of the plantation, the routines of the guards, the weaknesses of the overseers. He learned which slaves could be trusted with a secret glance, which ones would sell their own mother for an extra scrap of cornbread. He learned to read the weather, the stars, the subtle shifts in the wind. He stored every piece of knowledge, every slight, every act of brutality, in a mental ledger. The debt was growing. His chance came unexpectedly. Master Vance, in a rare fit of what he considered generosity, decided the slaves needed a reward for a good harvest. He announced a small gathering in the yard, a jug of cheap whiskey for the men, some extra cornmeal. It was a transparent ploy to foster a false sense of gratitude, but the slaves played their parts, murmuring thanks, their eyes carefully downcast. Eli, his back still tender, kept to the edges. He watched Briggs, already deep into the whiskey, his face flushed, his movements clumsy. He watched Crow, eyeing the women with predatory interest. He watched Vance, preening on the porch, accepting the hollow praise like a king. Later that night, as the moon cast long shadows, Eli slipped from his cabin. He moved like a ghost through the familiar paths. He knew Briggs slept alone in a small cabin near the stables, away from the main overseer's quarters. Eli had noticed the man's carelessness. He often left his lantern burning low on the table, and his pipe still smoldering on the windowsill. Fire was a constant danger on a plantation, but Briggs was arrogant, careless. Eli didn't need to break in. He simply waited. He saw the glow of the lantern through the thin curtains. He heard Briggs snoring. He crept closer, his heart hammering against his ribs, not with fear, but with a terrifying, cold purpose. He picked up a dry bundle of cane trash he'd hidden earlier. With hands that were steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him, he pushed it through the gap under Briggs' door. Then, using a flint and steel he'd painstakingly traded for weeks ago, a tiny, forbidden treasure, he struck a spark. Caught on the dry trash, he blew gently, coaxing the tiny flame into life. He watched as the orange tongue licked upwards, catching the edge of the rough wooden door. He didn't wait. He melted back into the shadows, moving silently towards the cane fields. He didn't look back, but he heard it, the first crackle of hungry fire, then Briggs' startled, drunken shout, then the rising panic as the flames took hold, then the screams, horrific, guttural screams that cut through the night air, mingling with the roar of the fire. Eli kept walking, his face impassive. The first entry in his ledger was paid. Briggs, the thief of names, the dealer of pain, was gone, consumed by the very element he'd been too careless to respect. The plantation was in chaos the next morning. Master Vance was apoplectic with rage. "Arson!" he roared, his face purple. "Some nigger did this. Crow, I want every slave questioned, every cabin searched. Find the culprit, or I'll have you all in chains." Crow, terrified of Vance's wrath, unleashed a reign of terror. Slaves were beaten indiscriminately. Suspicion fell on everyone. Eli kept his head down, his eyes dull, his movements slow and obedient. He expressed the appropriate shock and fear when questioned. He was just a quiet boy, still recovering from his own beating. Who would suspect him? The fire was declared an accident, caused by Briggs' drunken negligence. Vance, though furious, couldn't prove otherwise. The ledger entry stood, unseen, unpunished. But Eli knew his time at Cypress Grove was short. Vance's paranoia would only grow. He needed to move. He needed to disappear. He began to plan his escape, not just from Cypress Grove, but from the entire system. The escape was a blur of terror and adrenaline. Eli waited for a moonless night, He stole a knife from the kitchen, a small sack of cornbread, and a canteen. He slipped past the sleeping watchman, his heart pounding so loud he was sure it would give him away. He ran through the cane fields, the sharp leaves cutting his arms, the mud sucking at his boots. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs felt like lead. He followed the North Star, a cold, distant beacon in the vast, indifferent sky. He reached the river, exhausted and half delirious. The safe house was a small, unassuming cabin. An old black man with kind eyes and a Bible in his hand opened the door. "Preacher John," Eli gasped, collapsing on the porch. The man nodded. "You made it, son. Come in. You're safe now." For a few precious days, Eli rested, ate real food, and felt the crushing weight of Cypress Grove lift slightly from his shoulders. Preacher John spoke of hope, of freedom, of a life beyond the whip. But Eli couldn't shake the images burned into his mind. Briggs' screams, Vance's cold eyes, the ledger of debts. Safety wasn't enough. Justice wasn't served just by running away. He stayed long enough to regain his strength, then pressed on. He traveled by night, hiding by day, trusting only the stars and the occasional coded message from other conductors on the railroad. He crossed rivers, navigated swamps, evaded patrols. He saw the scars of slavery everywhere, the hollow eyes of field hands, the broken backs of men loading cotton bales, the constant, low hum of fear that permeated the South. Each sight added another name to his ledger. Each act of casual cruelty stoked the fire in his belly. He finally reached Philadelphia, a bustling city of free black people, abolitionist newspapers, and the constant electric buzz of possibility. He found work in a shipyard, his hands learning new calluses. He changed his name. Eli was dead. He chose Lazarus, the man who rose from the dead. Felt fitting. He had died on that ship bound for Louisiana, and Lazarus was what crawled out of the grave. For years, Lazarus worked, saved, and planned. He learned everything he could about the South, its geography, its plantations, its powerful men. He read newspapers, piecing together stories of cruelty and corruption. He listened to the tales of other escaped slaves, their stories adding names and faces to his growing list. He wasn't just seeking Vance anymore. He was seeking the system, the men who built their wealth on broken backs, who treated human beings as livestock, who believed their cruelty was their right. 9 names began to crystallize in his mind. 9 masters whose plantations were infamous for their brutality. 9 men who embodied the evil he had endured. Vance was first, but there would be others. He knew he couldn't fight them with fists or guns. He was one man against an entire society built on oppression. But fire was an equalizer. Fire didn't care about skin color or social standing. Fire consumed everything in its path. Fire was silent until it roared, and then it was unstoppable. He remembered the lesson of Briggs' cabin. Carelessness, arrogance, the belief that their world was unassailable. That was their weakness. He began his journey back south, not as a fugitive, but as a free man with papers, posing as a laborer looking for work. His northern accent was softened, his mannerisms carefully observed and mimicked. He presented himself as quiet, hardworking, unassuming, the perfect slave, the perfect servant. Planters looking for reliable help often snapped him up. They saw a broken man, eager to please, grateful for scraps. They never saw the ledger burning in his eyes. His second target was Master Alistair Croft of Magnolia Bend. Croft was known for his discipline. He believed in breaking the spirit before breaking the body. He kept a special punishment shed where slaves were locked in complete darkness for days, fed only water, subjected to constant, disorienting noise. Lazarus took a job in Croft's stables, just as he had at Cypress Grove. He observed. He learned Croft's routines. He noted the man's fondness for expensive brandy, often left half-finished on his desk in the library. He noted the dry timber of the old mansion, the thick velvet curtains, the abundance of oil lamps. One night, after ensuring Croft was deep in his cups, Lazarus slipped into the library. He didn't need to set a large fire. He simply overturned the brandy decanter onto the desk, near a guttering lamp. He lit a single match, dropped it onto the soaked wood, and vanished into the night. The fire started small, a flicker in the shadows. But the brandy was pure alcohol. It ignited with a whoosh, engulfing the desk, then the curtains, then the dry wooden beams of the ceiling. By the time the household awoke to the smell of smoke, the library was an inferno. Croft, disoriented and drunk, stumbled out of his bedroom directly into the heart of the blaze. His screams were lost in the roar of the fire. Magnolia Bend burned to the ground. Lazarus watched from a distant hill, the second entry in his ledger paid in full. The pattern was set. He moved from plantation to plantation, a ghost in plain sight. His third target was Master Bartholomew Finch, a man who prided himself on his scientific approach to slavery, keeping meticulous records of punishments and productivity. Lazarus worked in Finch's counting house, handling ledgers that detailed the buying and selling of human lives. He waited for Finch's annual audit, when the master would be locked in his office for hours, surrounded by mountains of paper, perfect tinder. Lazarus sabotaged the chimney flue, causing smoke to back up. He then accidentally knocked over a lantern near a stack of dry cotton bales stored just outside the office window. The fire spread with terrifying speed, trapping Finch in his own meticulously documented hell. The third name was crossed off. Each fire was different, tailored to the master's specific arrogance or carelessness. Master Silas Thorne kept a menagerie of exotic animals, including a pair of volatile Bengal tigers. Lazarus, working as a stable hand, knew the tigers' feeding schedule and the flimsy construction of their enclosure near the main house. On a night when Thorne was hosting a lavish party, Lazarus tampered with the lock on the tiger pen and set a small, smoldering fire in the dry hay bales stored beneath the big house's veranda. The fire spooked the tigers, who broke free, causing panic among the guests. In the chaos, the small fire grew, fueled by the veranda's dry wood and the fine linens of the party. Thorne, trying to flee the tigers, ran straight into the spreading flames. The fourth fire was a spectacle of terror and destruction. The South began to whisper. A phantom was stalking the plantations. Curse. Some said it was the ghost of a wronged slave. Others whispered of a northern agitator, a demon sent to punish the South. Planters grew nervous. They doubled their guards, checked their chimneys, locked their liquor cabinets. But Lazarus was always one step ahead. He understood their psychology. Their arrogance was their blind spot. They couldn't conceive that a slave, a nigger, could be this cunning, this patient, this relentless. They saw only the mask he wore, the quiet, obedient servant. They never saw the avenging angel beneath. His fifth target was Master Reginald Pike, a man known for his sadistic entertainments. He would force slaves to fight each other for his amusement, betting on the outcomes. Lazarus took a job as a groundskeeper. He learned Pike's schedule every Friday night. He hosted these brutal spectacles in a large, barn-like structure near the main house, lit by dozens of oil lamps and torches. The barn was filled with dry hay, straw, and the sweat and fear of the combatants. Lazarus spent weeks subtly weakening the support beams of the barn, replacing key nails with rotten wood. On the night of the fight, as the crowd roared and the oil lamps cast flickering shadows, Lazarus, hidden in the rafters, dropped a single, burning torch onto the largest pile of hay. The fire erupted instantly, a wall of flame cutting off the exits. The panicked crowd, including Pike, surged towards the weakened doors. The beams, compromised by Lazarus's careful sabotage, groaned and collapsed, trapping them inside. The fifth fire was a funeral pyre for cruelty. The legend of the fire phantom grew. Rewards were offered, but no one could describe him. He was a shadow, a rumor, a nightmare. Lazarus used the fear to his advantage. He moved more freely, as planters, desperate for reliable help they could trust, sometimes hired him based on his reputation as a quiet, hard worker from another plantation, a recommendation he forged with chilling ease. His sixth target was Master Horace Bellwether, an old man who ruled his plantation, Oakhaven, with a velvet glove hiding an iron fist. He was beloved by his white neighbors for his benevolence. But his slaves knew the truth. He used psychological torture, separating families, promising freedom only to cruelly revoke it, fostering distrust among the enslaved. Lazarus worked in Bellwether's gardens, tending the roses the old man was so proud of. He learned Bellwether's greatest fear, fire. The old man had nightmares about it, stemming from a childhood incident. Lazarus played on this. He started small, a smoldering pile of leaves near the tool shed, quickly extinguished. Then a scorched patch on the veranda railing. Each accident sent Bellwether into a panic, making him more paranoid, more reliant on his routines. Lazarus knew Bellwether always took a brandy nightcap in his study before bed, a room lined with bookshelves and heavy drapes. On the chosen night, Lazarus ensured the study's fireplace was banked high with embers. He then accidentally spilled a large quantity of lamp oil near the hearth and on the rug. He left a single, smoldering cigar but stolen from Bellwether's private stash on the oil-soaked rug. The old man, already on edge from the previous accidents, retired to his study for his brandy, seeking solace. He never saw the tiny wisp of smoke curling from the rug. The fire started slow, then exploded. Trapped by his own fear and the rapidly spreading flames, Bellwether perished in the room he thought was his sanctuary. The sixth name was erased. Lazarus felt the weight of his mission pressing down on him. The fires were justice, yes, but they were also a burden. He saw the faces of the innocent slaves caught in the aftermath, the children orphaned, the communities shattered. He told himself it was necessary, that the evil of the masters justified the collateral damage. But the doubt, cold and insidious, began to creep in. Was he becoming the monster he sought to destroy? He pushed the thought away. The ledger demanded payment. There were still 3 names. His 7th target was Master Virgil Stone, a man who owned a fleet of riverboats used to transport slaves down the Mississippi. Stone was rarely on his plantation, River's End. He was usually on his flagship, the Cotton Queen. Lazarus knew he had to strike when Stone was ashore. He took a job as a deckhand on one of Stone's smaller boats, learning the routines, the layout of the Cotton Queen, and the location of the main house. Stone's plantation house was modern, built with brick, but the outbuildings, the stables, the storage sheds, the slave quarters were all wood. Lazarus's plan was audacious. He would set fire to the outbuildings, creating a massive conflagration that would inevitably spread to the main house, especially with the dry summer grass acting as a fuse. He also knew Stone kept a large cache of gunpowder in a shed near the docks, used for blasting stumps. On the night Stone was scheduled to be at River's End for a business meeting, Lazarus set his plan in motion. He started multiple small fires in the dry grass around the outbuildings, then made his way to the gunpowder shed. He didn't need to blow it up, he just needed to ensure the fire reached it. He poured a trail of lamp oil from the shed towards the nearest burning outbuilding. Then he vanished. The fires merged, growing into an unstoppable wall of flame. It reached the gunpowder shed. The explosion was cataclysmic, shaking the ground for miles, sending a fireball hundreds of feet into the air. The shockwave shattered windows in the main house, and the intense heat ignited the roof. Stone, trying to flee the explosion, was caught in the secondary firestorm. River's End was obliterated. The 7th entry was paid with fire and thunder. The South was in a state of near panic. The fire phantom wasn't just targeting isolated plantations. He was striking at the heart of the slave economy. Stone's riverboat empire was a major artery of the trade. Planters formed militias, hunted suspected abolitionists, and subjected their slaves to even harsher scrutiny. But Lazarus was a ghost. He moved through the chaos like smoke, his resolve hardening. 2 names left, and the first was the one that had started it all, Thaddeus Vance. He returned to Louisiana, to the region near Cypress Grove. Vance, paranoid and enraged by the string of arsons, had fortified his plantation. He had extra guards, dogs, and a network of informants among the slaves. He rarely left the big house, Getting close would be nearly impossible. But Lazarus knew Vance's one remaining weakness: his pride. Vance still believed his plantation was the model of efficiency, the pinnacle of Southern aristocracy. He still held lavish parties to prove it, to show the other planters he wasn't afraid. Lazarus posed as a skilled carpenter, offering his services to repair storm damage to Cypress Grove's outbuildings. His forged references were impeccable. Vance, needing the work done and perhaps subconsciously wanting to prove his control, hired him. Lazarus worked diligently, his head down, his hands busy. He mapped the new security, noted the guard rotations, observed Vance's habits. He saw the fear beneath the bluster, the way Vance's hand trembled slightly when he poured his whiskey. He saw the haunted look in Alara Vance's eyes. She knew, somehow, that the reckoning was coming. The opportunity came during the annual harvest ball. Vance, determined to show defiance, threw his most extravagant party yet. The big house was lit up like a beacon, filled with the elite of the parish. Oil lamps glowed in every window, candles flickered on every table. A massive bonfire roared in the garden. The air was thick with the smell of roasting meat, expensive perfume, and underlying tension. Lazarus had spent weeks preparing. He knew the house's construction intimately from his time as a boy. He knew the old, dry timbers in the attic, the path of the wiring for the new gas lamps Vance had installed, a modern luxury that was also a vulnerability. He knew the location of the main oil and gas lines feeding the lamps. On the night of the ball, Lazarus didn't set a single fire. He created a network of ignition points. In the attic, he piled dry rags soaked in lamp oil near the main gas line junction. In the library, he placed a small, time device, a simple fuse made from slow-burning rope leading to a jar of oil near the fireplace. In the kitchen, he sabotaged the stove, ensuring it would overheat and ignite the grease traps. He even placed small bundles of oil-soaked cloth in the potted palms lining the grand staircase. He waited until the party was at its peak, the music loud, the guests drunk and laughing, Vance holding court in the center of the room, his arrogance a palpable force. Then, from the safety of the dense woods beyond the garden, Lazarus struck a single match. He didn't light anything. He simply watched. The first sign was smoke curling from the attic vent. Then, a flicker of orange in the library window. Then, a sudden whoosh as the kitchen stove erupted. Panic erupted instantly. Guests screamed, scrambling for the doors. But the fires were spreading too fast, fed by the dry wood, the gas lines, the oil lamps. The grand staircase became an inferno as the potted palms ignited. The front doors were blocked by a collapsing chandelier, its crystals melting in the heat. Lazarus watched from the woods as the big house of Cypress Grove became a roaring furnace. He saw figures silhouetted in the windows, pounding on the glass, their mouths open in silent screams. He saw Vance, his fine suit burning, stumble onto the balcony, his face a mask of terror and disbelief. He saw him look out, not at the flames, but towards the woods, as if sensing the presence of the ghost he had created so long ago. Then the balcony collapsed, and Vance vanished into the maw of the fire. The eighth fire was the most spectacular, the most personal. It wasn't just justice, it was closure. The boy who had been stolen from Albany had finally settled the score with the man who had stolen his life. Lazarus felt a profound emptiness, not satisfaction. The fire consumed Vance, but it didn't bring Eli's parents back. It didn't erase the years of pain. It just ended one chapter. Only one name remained on the ledger: Master Cornelius Blackwood. Blackwood was different. He wasn't just a planter. He was a politician, a state senator, a vocal defender of slavery in the halls of power. His plantation, Blackwood Hall, was less a farm and more a fortress, reflecting his status and paranoia. He employed private detectives, not just overseers. He was rarely alone. Killing him wouldn't just be an act of vengeance. It would be a political statement, a strike against the very institution. Lazarus knew this would be his most dangerous mission. Blackwood Hall was heavily guarded. Getting close was nearly impossible. But Lazarus had one advantage: Blackwood's vanity. The senator was writing a book, a treatise on the natural order of slavery, and he needed a quiet, reliable amanuensis, a secretary to take dictation. He advertised for a literate, discreet man, Lazarus, with his carefully cultivated northern accent and forged references as a down-on-his-luck clerk, applied. He was interviewed, scrutinized, and finally hired. Blackwood was a large man with a booming voice and eyes that missed nothing. He tested Lazarus's literacy, his shorthand, his knowledge of politics. Lazarus played his part perfectly, humble, intelligent, but utterly subservient. He was given a small room in the servants' wing, far from the main house, but with access to Blackwood's study. For weeks, Lazarus worked. He sat silently as Blackwood pontificated about the inferiority of the Negro race, the divine right of white supremacy, the economic necessity of the peculiar institution. Each word was a lash on Lazarus's soul, but he kept his face neutral, his pen moving steadily across the page. He memorized Blackwood's routines. His morning constitutional, his afternoon brandy in the study, his late-night readings in the library. He noted the house's security, the guards on the gate, the dogs patrolling the perimeter, the locked doors. He also noted Blackwood's one indulgence: his collection of rare, highly flammable chemicals, kept in a locked cabinet in his private laboratory, a room adjacent to the library. Blackwood was an amateur chemist, fascinated by explosives and incendiaries. The irony wasn't lost on Lazarus. The plan was complex. He needed to create a fire that would be inescapable, but also one that would destroy Blackwood's precious book manuscript and his laboratory, symbols of his intellectual justification for slavery. He also needed to ensure his own escape. He waited for a night when a storm was forecast. Heavy rain would mask sounds and provide cover. He spent days subtly weakening the lock on the chemical cabinet. He stole small quantities of the most volatile compounds, hiding them in his room. He studied the gas lines feeding the library and study lamps. On the night of the storm, Lazarus put his plan into action. As Blackwood settled into the library with a glass of port, Lazarus excused himself, claiming a headache. He went to his room, mixed the stolen chemicals into a crude, highly flammable paste. He then slipped back into the house, using servant passages he'd memorized. He applied the paste to the gas lines in the library and the door frames. He placed small jars of the mixture near Blackwood's favorite armchair and his manuscript desk. Then, he went to the chemical cabinet in the lab. He didn't just open it. He rigged a small, delayed ignition device using a candle and a slow-burning fuse he'd prepared. The fuse would burn for 20 minutes before igniting the volatile chemicals inside the cabinet. He returned to his room, packed his few belongings, and waited. He heard the first rumble of thunder. Then, a distant whoosh from the direction of the library. He knew the gas lines had ignited. Then, moments later, a much larger explosion rocked the house. The chemical cabinet in the lab had detonated. Alarms began to blare. Shouts filled the air. Lazarus slipped out of his window into the driving rain. He moved through the gardens, avoiding the panicked guards rushing towards the main house. He didn't look back, but he heard the screams, the crackle of the fire, the secondary explosions as Blackwood's chemical collection went up. The ninth and final fire was a symphony of destruction, consuming the man, his ideology, and his legacy. He ran through the storm, the rain washing the soot from his face, mingling with tears he hadn't known he was shedding. He ran until he reached the Mississippi River. He stole a small skiff and rowed with all his strength, putting miles between himself and the burning ruin of Blackwood Hall. He didn't stop running. He made his way back to the north, not to Philadelphia this time, but further to Canada, to true freedom. He changed his name again, became a ghost in a new land. He worked as a laborer, a quiet man who kept to himself, his eyes holding a depth of sorrow and resolve that few could fathom. Years later, an old man sat on a porch in a small Ontario town, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and red. A young boy, his grandson, played at his feet. The boy looked up, his eyes wide. "Grandpa," he asked, "why do you always look so sad when you see a fire?" The old man, his face a roadmap of hard years, looked at the boy. He saw the innocence, the unbroken spirit. He thought of Eli, the boy from Albany. He thought of the 9 fires, the screams, the justice, the terrible cost. He thought of the ledger finally closed. He placed a gnarled hand on the boy's head. "Some fires, child," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "Burn away the bad, but they leave scars that never heal. Remember that. Remember to build, not to burn." He looked back at the sunset, the colors fading into twilight. The revenge was complete. The debt was paid. But the fire, once lit, never truly goes out.